I was standing in the car lot when I saw Martha's truck with a price tag hanging from the mirror. $21,500. When Troy looked me straight in the eye and said, "It was just an old truck, old man. You'll forget it soon enough." Something inside me shifted like gears catching in a transmission. I didn't say anything, but that afternoon I made 3 phone calls. The first was to the police. The second was to my lawyer. The third was to every family member who thought they knew the whole story. Let me take you back to that Saturday morning, before I knew what my son-in-law had done. I'd been up since 5:30, same as every day for the past 47 years. Coffee black, toast dry, morning news on the little television Martha had insisted we keep in the kitchen. She said it made breakfast feel less lonely after the kids moved out. Now everything felt lonely, but I kept the routine anyway. Troy had called the night before, voice bright and cheerful like always. "Hey Walter," he'd said, "Megan and I were thinking of taking the kids to Six Flags next weekend. You should come with us." My treat. I'd felt that familiar warmth spread through my chest, the gratitude I always felt when they included me. Since Martha died 18 months ago, those invitations had become precious. I said yes immediately, probably too eagerly. That morning, I was planning to swing by their house with a cooler full of Martha's famous potato salad for their church picnic. I'd spent 2 hours the night before, following her handwritten recipe card, the one stained with fingerprints and years of use. The handwriting was faded, but I knew every word by heart. 2 pounds russet potatoes, 6 hard-boiled eggs, half-cup mayonnaise, real mayo, not that Miracle Whip garbage. Martha had strong opinions about condiments. The drive to their neighborhood always made me feel hopeful. Nice houses, good schools, the kind of place Megan deserved to raise her children. I'd helped with their down payment 4 years ago, $28,000 from the account Martha and I had been building for our retirement. She'd insisted, "Our daughter's happiness is worth more than any vacation we might take," she'd said. Martha was always generous that way, sometimes too generous. I was thinking about that conversation when I decided to take the scenic route past downtown, maybe stop at the hardware store for some oil filters for the Ford. That's when I saw it. The truck. Martha's truck. Our truck. Sitting there in Murphy's used cars like it belonged to someone else. My first thought was that I was seeing things. The mind plays tricks when you're grieving, everyone says so. But I knew every scratch on that bumper, every ding in the tailgate. I knew the way the driver's door stuck just slightly when you tried to close it, how you had to give it that extra push with your hip. I knew the rosary hanging from the rearview mirror, the one Martha had blessed at St. Michael's before her first chemotherapy session. I parked across the street and walked over like a man in a dream. The salesman, a kid who couldn't have been more than 25, smiled at me with practiced enthusiasm. "Beautiful truck, sir. 2012 F-150, only 92,000 miles. Previous owner took excellent care of it. I can make you a great deal today." Previous owner. The words echoed in my head like a bell tolling. What happened to the previous owner? I asked, my voice sounding strange and distant. The kid shrugged. "Guy needed quick cash. Gambling debts, I think. Sad story, but his loss is your gain, right?" That's when Troy appeared from behind the office trailer, keys jingling in his hand like loose change. He stopped when he saw me, his face cycling through expressions I'd never seen before. Surprise, guilt, then something harder, colder. Something that looked almost like relief. "Walter," he said, walking over with that easy smile I'd grown to trust completely. "What brings you to this part of town?" I pointed at the truck, unable to form words. He followed my gaze and nodded, hands in his pockets now, the keys quiet. "Yeah, I meant to tell you about that," he said. "We needed the money. Megan's been wanting to redo the kitchen for months, and you know how she gets when she wants something. But it's not your truck," I managed to say. "It's Martha's truck. It's my truck." Troy's expression shifted again, and for a moment I saw something that made my stomach clench. Contempt. Pure, undiluted contempt. "Come on, Walter. It was just sitting in your driveway collecting dust. When's the last time you even drove it? Martha's been gone over a year. It's time to let go of the past." The salesman was watching us now, probably wondering if he was about to lose a sale or witness a family drama. I felt heat rising in my chest, but my hands were cold, fumbling with the spare keys in my pocket. The keys I'd given Troy for emergencies. For emergencies. You forged my signature, I said quietly. You used the spare keys I gave you for emergencies and you forged my signature on the title. Troy stepped closer, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. It was just an old truck, old man. You'll forget it soon enough. We all know your memory isn't what it used to be. That's when something in my chest clicked into place, like a bolt sliding home in a rifle. Not hot anger, not the explosion I might have expected. Something colder, more deliberate. Something that felt like the steady vibration of a diesel engine settling into cruise control on a long haul across Texas plains. I looked at Troy for a long moment, memorizing his face, the way his mouth twisted when he thought he was being clever. Then I turned and walked back to my car without another word. The drive home gave me time to think. Time to let the pieces fall into place like cargo settling in a trailer bed. I wasn't surprised, not really. Martha had never liked Troy, though she'd been too polite to say much. He's got expensive tastes for a man with a teacher's salary. She'd whispered to me once after he'd shown up to Christmas dinner wearing a watch that cost more than I made in a month driving freight. Martha. The thought of her hit me like a physical blow as I pulled into our driveway. Our driveway where her truck should have been sitting. The truck that had carried her to every doctor's appointment during those last 8 months. The truck where she'd cried after getting her diagnosis, gripping the steering wheel until her knuckles went white. The truck that still smelled faintly of her perfume if you knew where to breathe. The day Martha was diagnosed, we were supposed to go furniture shopping for our 40th anniversary. She'd been complaining about our old dining room table for months, how the finish was wearing off, how it wobbled when you leaned on it wrong. Let's get something nice, Walter, she'd said. Something that'll last another 40 years. Instead, we were sitting in Dr. Rodriguez's office, holding hands while he explained why the blood tests had come back abnormal, why the fatigue and weight loss weren't just signs of getting older. Pancreatic cancer, he said, the words falling into the room like stones into still water. Stage 3. I'm sorry, Martha. I wish I had better news. Martha squeezed my hand so hard I thought she might break something. But her voice was steady when she spoke. How long? 6 months to a year with treatment. Maybe 18 months if we're aggressive and you respond well to chemotherapy. And without treatment? Dr. Rodriguez looked uncomfortable, like he'd rather be anywhere else in the world. 3 months, maybe 4. Martha nodded like he'd told her the weather forecast. Then we'd better get started. Hadn't we? The drive home was the longest 12 minutes of my life. Martha stared out the passenger window of the Ford, watching the familiar streets of our neighborhood pass by like she was seeing them for the last time. When we pulled into our driveway, she didn't get out immediately. Walter, she said, still looking out the window, I need you to promise me something. Anything. I need you to promise me you won't let this turn you into someone I wouldn't recognize. I need you to promise me you'll take care of yourself after I'm gone. That you won't let people take advantage of your grief. Martha, don't talk like that. We're gonna fight this thing. She turned to look at me then, and her eyes were dry but fierce. We're gonna fight it, yes, but we're also going to be realistic about it. And part of being realistic means accepting that I might not win this fight. You're the strongest person I know. Strength doesn't cure cancer, honey, but it does help you face it with dignity. She reached over and touched my cheek with fingers that already felt too thin, too fragile. Promise me, Walter. Promise me you won't let grief make you stupid. I promise, I said, not knowing how prophetic those words would become. The chemotherapy started 2 weeks later. Every Tuesday and Friday for 6 months, we'd drive to the cancer center in the Ford. Martha in the passenger seat with a bag full of magazines she never read and crackers she couldn't keep down. The truck became our sanctuary during those months. The one place where we could pretend everything was normal. She'd insist on driving sometimes, even when her hands shook from the medication. This is still my truck, she'd say when I tried to take the keys. I'm not an invalid yet. We'd sit in the parking lot after each treatment, waiting for the nausea to pass before making the drive home. Martha would lean back in the driver's seat, eyes closed, breathing slowly and deliberately like she was memorizing the feeling of being alive. The rosary appeared on the rearview mirror after her third treatment. I'd never seen it before. A simple string of wooden beads with a small silver crucifix that caught the light when the truck moved. Where did that come from? I asked. Sister Catherine at the hospital, Martha said. She said it had been blessed by someone important, that it was supposed to bring peace to people on difficult journeys. Do you believe that? Martha opened her eyes and looked at the rosary swaying gently as we pulled out of the parking lot. I believe that sometimes we need something to hold on to when everything else feels like it's slipping away. The rosary stayed there for the rest of her life, and every time I see it now, I remember that conversation. Remember the way she looked at those beads like they were a lifeline thrown to someone drowning in an ocean of uncertainty. I sat in my own car for a long time, staring at the empty space where the Ford should have been. The concrete was stained there, a perfect rectangle of clean pavement surrounded by oil spots from 40 years of parking cars. Everything had a shadow, even the things that were gone. Inside the house, I made myself a sandwich I didn't want and tried to think about what Martha would have done. She'd been the fighter in our family, the one who called the school when Megan's teacher was unfair, the one who marched into the insurance office when they tried to deny her cancer treatment. Fight for what's right, Walter, she used to say. Don't let people walk on you just because it's easier. That's when I remembered the loan. $18,000. 2 years of payments, $300 a month like clockwork, deposited directly from my checking account into Troy's. I'd started the payments when he lost his job at the high school, something about budget cuts that never quite made sense. Just temporary, Dad, he'd said. Just until I find something else. But Troy hadn't found something else, had he? He'd found poker games. He'd found sports betting. He'd found a dozen ways to throw away money that wasn't his while living in a house I'd helped him buy, driving cars I'd helped him finance, eating groceries I'd helped him afford. I walked to my desk in the corner of the living room, the old roll-top Martha had bought at an estate sale 20 years ago. She'd refinished it herself, sanding away decades of scratches and staining it honey oak. Everything in this house had her fingerprints on it, her care, her attention. The bank statements were in the bottom drawer, filed by year in manila folders with Martha's careful handwriting. 2022, 2023, 2024. I spread them across the desktop like dealing cards, looking for the pattern I knew I'd find. There it was. March 15th, 2022. First payment to Troy Matthews, $300. Then April 15th, May 15th. Every month for 24 months, money flowing out of our account and into his like water through a broken pipe. But that wasn't all, was it? I kept digging, kept following the paper trail Martha had always insisted on maintaining. June 20th, 2022. Deposit, $700. Memo. Truck insurance deductible after Megan's accident. September 3rd. Deposit, $1,200. Memo. School clothes for the kids. November 28th. Deposit, $850. Memo. Thanksgiving groceries for family dinner. The numbers added up like miles on an odometer, relentless and undeniable. $26,430 over 2 years. Not counting the help with their down payment. Not counting the Christmas presents for the grandkids, the birthday money, the dozen small emergencies where Grandpa Walter always came through with his checkbook and his trusting smile. I was still sitting there when the phone rang at 8:30 that night. Megan's number on the caller ID, probably wondering why I hadn't shown up with the potato salad. "Hi, Daddy," she said, and her voice sounded strained, artificial. "We missed you at the picnic today. Are you feeling okay?" "I'm fine, sweetheart. Just had some business to take care of." Business? A pause, and I could hear Troy talking in the background, his voice urgent and insistent. "Look, Daddy, Troy told me about running into you today. About the misunderstanding." Misunderstanding. The word hung in the air between us like smoke from a fire neither of us wanted to acknowledge. "There's no misunderstanding, Megan. Your husband stole my truck and forged my signature to sell it. That's called theft and fraud." "Daddy, please. You're being dramatic. It was just sitting there and we really needed the money. Troy's got this opportunity, this business investment that could set us up for life." I closed my eyes, seeing Martha's face the day she died, how she'd gripped my hand and made me promise to take care of myself, not to let people take advantage of my good nature. What kind of business investment requires stolen property, honey? It's not stolen. It's... She trailed off, probably realizing how that sentence was going to end. Look, you're clinging to the past, Daddy. Mama's been gone for over a year. That truck was just making you more depressed. Sitting there reminding you of everything you've lost. We thought we were helping you move on. By stealing from me. Another pause, longer this time. When she spoke again, her voice was harder, colder. Like she was reading from a script Troy had prepared. You're making everyone miserable with your obsession. Daddy? The kids ask why Grandpa is always so sad. Troy says you've changed since Mama died. That you're not the same person anymore. Maybe it's time to consider that we know what's best for the family. The family. Not my family. The family, like I was some kind of distant relative they had to manage, some burden they'd inherited along with Martha's china and her recipe cards. I hung up without saying goodbye. That night, I sat in Martha's recliner, the one she'd used during her chemotherapy treatments, and I did what I should have done years ago. I got angry. Not the hot, explosive anger that burns itself out in shouting matches and slammed doors. The cold anger that builds like pressure in a steam engine, the kind that moves mountains and changes landscapes. I thought about every sacrifice Martha and I had made for our daughter. The overtime shifts I'd worked to pay for her college. The second mortgage we'd taken to help with her wedding. The retirement plans we'd postponed and postponed until postponing became permanent. I met Martha Hayes on a Tuesday in 1973 at the Blue Moon truck stop outside Lubbock. I was 23 years old, driving freight for Henderson Logistics, and she was 19, working the night shift to pay for nursing school. She had hair the color of autumn wheat and eyes that seemed to see right through whatever tough guy act you were putting on. I'd been coming through that truck stop for 6 months, always ordering the same thing, black coffee, apple pie, and whatever was left of my pride after another 16-hour haul from El Paso to Dallas. Martha served coffee like she was pouring liquid gold, careful and deliberate, never spilling a drop even when the drunks got rowdy or the long haulers got handsy. The first time I worked up the courage to talk to her about something other than my order, she was wiping down tables at 2 in the morning, humming something that sounded like church music. The truck stop was nearly empty except for a couple of drivers sleeping in their cabs and an old man nursing a cup of coffee that had gone cold hours ago. "Coffee's good tonight," I said, which was the stupidest opening line in the history of stupid opening lines. She looked up at me with those eyes, and I swear I felt something shift in my chest like gears finding their groove. "It's the same coffee we serve every night, Walter. Same brand, same pot, same everything." She knew my name. I'd been leaving dollar tips on a 75-cent cup of coffee for 6 months, and she knew my name. "But you're drinking it different tonight," she said, sliding into the booth across from me uninvited. "You're not watching the clock, not calculating how many miles you've got left before your mandatory rest period. You're just sitting here drinking coffee like a normal person." "I'm not sure I qualify as normal," I said. "None of us do, honey. That's what makes life interesting." We talked until sunrise that morning, about everything and nothing. She told me about nursing school, about wanting to help people heal, about growing up poor in a house where love was measured in sacrifices made and dreams deferred. I told her about driving, about the loneliness of highways that stretched from horizon to horizon, about wanting something more than truck stops and loading docks and motel rooms that all looked the same. When the morning shift arrived, she untied her apron and folded it carefully, like it was made of something precious instead of polyester and coffee stains. "I'll be here Thursday night," she said, "if you're passing through." I wasn't scheduled to pass through on Thursday. My route that week took me north to Oklahoma City, then west to Amarillo. But I traded routes with Danny Kowalski, told him I needed to pick up a load in Lubbock, lied so smoothly that I almost believed it myself. Thursday night, she was waiting with 2 cups of coffee already poured, black for me, cream and sugar for her. We talked until dawn again, and this time when she stood to leave, I stood with her. "Can I drive you home?" I asked. "I live 6 miles out of town with my aunt and 3 cousins in a trailer that's older than I am," she said. "You sure you want to see where the coffee girl goes when she's not pouring refills for truckers?" I've never been more sure of anything in my life. Her home was exactly what she'd described, A single wide trailer with faded aluminum siding and a front porch made of concrete blocks and 2x4s. But Martha had planted flowers along the walkway, marigolds and petunias that bloomed like they were defying the hardscrabble dirt to produce anything beautiful. She turned to me before going inside, and in the early morning light, she looked like something out of a dream I hadn't known I was having. "Walter," she said, "I need you to understand something. I'm not looking for a good time or a way to pass the hours between shifts. I'm looking for someone who wants to build something that lasts." "What kind of something?" I asked. "The kind that survives everything life throws at it," she said. "The kind that gets stronger when things get harder. The kind that means something." I kissed her then, standing in that trailer park with the sun coming up over the Texas plains, and I knew I'd found the thing I'd been driving toward my entire life without knowing it. I thought about Martha's last words to me in the hospital. "Take care of yourself, Walter. Don't let them eat you alive." At the time, I'd thought she was talking about grief, about not letting sorrow consume me. Now I understood what she'd really meant. She'd seen what I'd been too trusting to see, what love had blinded me to. Monday morning, I was waiting outside First National Bank when they opened at 9. I'd been a customer there for 37 years. Since Megan was in diapers and Martha was pregnant with the son we'd lost to a miscarriage. Everyone knew me, respected me, trusted me the way small-town banks trust people who pay their bills on time and never overdraw their accounts. Mrs. Patterson, the branch manager, smiled when she saw me walk in. "Morning, Walter. How can we help you today?" "I need to cancel an automatic transfer," I said, placing the bank statements on her desk. "And I need to see all the records of deposits made to this account over the past 2 years. She looked at the papers, her expression growing concerned. "Mr. Matthews' account? Walter, is everything all right? This is your son-in-law's account." "That's what I'm trying to figure out," I said. It took 45 minutes to print everything, every check, every deposit, every wire transfer. Mrs. Patterson watched me review the papers with growing alarm, probably wondering if she was witnessing the first signs of dementia or something worse. But the numbers didn't lie. They never do. $26,430 in direct help, plus another $8,000 in what Troy had called emergency loans, plus the down payment assistance, plus the insurance additions, plus a dozen other expenses I'd forgotten about or chosen not to think about. $47,680 over 4 years. Enough to buy a decent car. Enough for a down payment on a small house. Enough to live on for 2 years if you were careful with your money. I was not careful with my money. I was generous with my money the way Martha had raised me to be, the way we'd raised our daughter to be. Generosity had been our family's religion, kindness our creed. We'd believed that love meant giving until it hurt, then giving a little more. Mrs. Patterson was talking, asking questions about my mental state, whether I needed someone to call, but her voice seemed to come from very far away. I was thinking about Martha's truck, about the rosary hanging from the rearview mirror, about all the conversations we'd had during those last months, sitting in that truck outside the cancer center while she gathered strength for another round of chemotherapy. "I'm going to need copies of all of this," I told Mrs. Patterson. "And I want that automatic transfer canceled immediately." "Walter," she said gently, "maybe you should talk to Megan first. Family finances can be complicated." "Family," I repeated. "Yes, they can be." My next stop was Harold Morrison's law office, 2 blocks down from the bank in a building that had housed lawyers for over 100 years. Harold and I had gone to high school together, played football on the same team before he went off to college and I went into the Army. He'd handled Martha's will, our house refinancing, all the legal business that accumulates over 4 decades of marriage. He looked up when I walked in, his face creasing into the kind of smile reserved for old friends. "Walter Hayes," he said, "haven't seen you since Martha's funeral. How are you holding up?" "I'm holding up fine, Harold. But I think I need a lawyer." I spread the bank records across his conference table like evidence at a crime scene, which I was beginning to realize was exactly what they were. Harold put on his reading glasses and studied the papers with the methodical attention that had made him the best attorney in 3 counties. After 15 minutes, he looked up at me with an expression I'd never seen before. something between surprise and admiration. "Walter," he said slowly, "are you telling me your son-in-law has been systematically defrauding you for 4 years?" "I'm telling you my son-in-law sold my truck without my permission using forged documents, and I want to know what my options are." Harold leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled like a church roof. "Your options are extensive and unpleasant." For him, we spent the next 2 hours mapping out what Harold called a comprehensive response strategy. It sounded like something from a military operation, which seemed appropriate given what we were planning. The truck was the easy part. Harold made 3 phone calls and had it impounded as stolen property within an hour. The title was in my name, the registration was in my name, and Troy's forged signature wouldn't survive 5 minutes of scrutiny from anyone who knew how to examine documents. But Harold wanted to dig deeper. The next morning, Harold called me at 7:30, his voice tight with the kind of excitement lawyers get when they smell blood in the water. "Walter," he said, "you need to get down here immediately and bring every piece of paper you have with Troy's signature on it." His office was different when I arrived, transformed from the casual space where we discussed wills and property deeds into something that looked like a war room. 3 tables covered with documents, a whiteboard covered with dates and dollar amounts, boxes of files stacked against every wall. Harold's assistant, a sharp-eyed woman named Patricia who'd been with him for 20 years, looked up when I walked in. She was wearing latex gloves and handling papers like they were evidence at a crime scene, which I was beginning to realize they were. "Mr. Hayes," she said, "your son-in-law is either the most careless criminal in Texas or the most arrogant one I've ever seen." She walked me through what they'd discovered in the past 18 hours. The insurance fraud was just the beginning. Troy had been systematically forging my signature for over 2 years, not just on the truck title, but on loan applications, insurance claims, and investment documents I'd never seen before. "Look at this," Patricia said, pointing to a stack of papers. "Credit card applications in your name, all approved, all maxed out within 6 months. He's been using your credit score to fund his gambling habit." "How much?" I asked. Harold consulted his notes, counting everything: the direct theft, the fraudulent credit accounts, the forged insurance claims, and the fake investment losses. "We're looking at just over $130,000. $130,000. The number hit me like a physical blow. That was more than I'd made in 3 years driving truck. That was enough to buy a house, enough to retire on if you were careful with your money. "But there's more," Harold continued. Patricia found something interesting in the property records. Patricia pulled out a file folder thick with official-looking documents. "Your son-in-law listed you as a co-owner on a rental property in Dallas. Did you know about this?" I shook my head, feeling sick. "The property doesn't exist, Mr. Hayes. It's a vacant lot that's been for sale for 8 years. But Troy used the fake ownership papers to secure a loan for $60,000 from a private lender, a loan that's in default and for which you're listed as the primary guarantor." "Meaning what?" "Meaning that as far as the lender is concerned, you owe them $60,000 plus interest and penalties. They've already filed a lien against your house." "My house?" "The house Martha and I had bought 37 years ago. The house where we'd raised our daughter. The house where every room held 40 years of memories. The house Troy was apparently planning to steal from me the same way he'd stolen everything else." Harold must have seen something in my expression, because his voice gentled. "Walter, we can fight this. All of it. But it's going to be ugly and it's going to be public, and your daughter is going to be caught in the middle." "What about Megan?" I asked. "Could she face charges?" Patricia and Harold exchanged a look that made my stomach clench. "Some of the documents have her signature," Harold said carefully. "Either she knew what Troy was doing or he forged her signature too. We'll need to examine the handwriting more carefully to determine which." I thought about my daughter, about the little girl who used to sit on my lap while I read her bedtime stories, about the young woman who'd called me crying when she couldn't afford her college textbooks, about the mother who'd asked me to walk her down the aisle because she trusted me to give her away to someone who would love her the way she deserved. "How long do we have to file charges?" "There's no statute of limitations on ongoing fraud. To recover your assets." Harold paused, consulting his calendar. "The foreclosure proceeding on the fake Dallas property is scheduled for next month. If we don't act fast, You could lose your house before we can prove the lien is fraudulent. I looked around the war room Harold had created, at all the evidence of my son-in-law's betrayal spread across 3 tables like pieces of a puzzle that spelled out my own stupidity. What do you need from me? Everything, Harold said. I need you to file a police report for every single fraudulent transaction. I need you to contact your bank and flag your accounts for suspicious activity. I need you to be prepared to testify in court about every loan you made to Troy, every signature you didn't authorize, every lie he told you about needing money. Most importantly, Harold continued, I need you to be prepared for the possibility that your daughter was either a victim or an accomplice. Because either way, this is going to destroy your family. It's already destroyed, I said. I'm just picking up the pieces now. Harold, I said finally, how long has this been going on? Since about 6 months after your wife was diagnosed with cancer, he said quietly. I'm sorry, Walter. I know this isn't easy to hear, but this is a pattern of financial elder abuse. He's been using your grief and your generosity to systematically drain your assets. The words hit me like a physical blow. Elder abuse. I'd heard the term before, seen the public service announcements on television, but I'd never imagined it could happen to me. I wasn't some confused old man who forgot to pay his bills. I was Walter Hayes. I'd driven freight trucks across 48 states. I'd built a business, raised a family, owned my home free and clear. But I was also a 70-year-old widower who'd been so grateful for his daughter's attention, so desperate to remain part of her life, that I'd ignored every warning sign, explained away every red flag, justified every unreasonable request for money. What do you recommend? I asked. Harold smiled, and for the first time in months, I felt something that might have been hope. We burn it all down, he said, legally and completely, and then we build something better from the ashes. The police were surprisingly sympathetic when I filed the theft report Tuesday morning. Detective Martinez, a young woman about Megan's age, listened to my story without judgment, asked pointed questions about the forged documents, and seemed genuinely angry on my behalf. This happens more than you'd think, Mr. Hayes, she said. Family members who think they can get away with fraud because their victims are too ashamed or too loyal to press charges. I'm not too ashamed, I said, and my loyalty has limits. She smiled. Good. We'll need you to gather any additional documentation you can find. Bank records, insurance claims, anything with his signature that you know you didn't authorize. I spent that afternoon going through every drawer, every file folder, every box of papers Martha had organized so carefully. She'd kept everything, bless her heart, every receipt and contract and piece of correspondence. It was like following breadcrumbs through a forest of deception, except the breadcrumbs led not to safety but to the realization of how thoroughly I'd been played. The insurance policies Troy had convinced me to change, adding his name as a beneficiary, just in case something happens to Megan. The power of attorney documents, he'd said, were standard legal protection for aging parents. The investment account he'd opened in my name, promising better returns than my savings account while steadily draining the principal. By evening, I had a box full of evidence and a heart full of something I hadn't felt since Martha died. Purpose. Wednesday morning brought the first panicked phone call. Troy's voice was higher than usual, tight with what might have been fear. Walter, he said, there's been some kind of mistake. The police called and said my truck was impounded for theft. That's crazy, right? You know I bought that truck fair and square. Your truck? I asked. Well, I mean, technically it was yours, but we had an agreement. You said I could sell it if we needed the money. I said no such thing, Troy, and we both know it. A pause, and I could almost hear the wheels turning, the calculations of how much trouble he might be in. Look, this is getting blown out of proportion. Why don't you come over for dinner tonight? Megan's making your favorite pot roast. We can talk about this like family. We are family, Troy. That's what makes this so disappointing. I hung up and immediately called Harold, who confirmed that Troy had already contacted 2 bail bondsmen and a criminal defense attorney. Word was spreading through the small legal community like wildfire, and the consensus seemed to be that Troy Matthews was in serious trouble. The second call came from Megan an hour later, and this time there was no pretense of concern for my well-being. Daddy, she said, her voice shaking with what might have been anger or fear, You need to drop these charges immediately. Troy made a mistake, but you're destroying our family over it. I'm not destroying anything, honey. I'm protecting what's left. The children ask where Grandpa is. They want to know why you won't come to dinner anymore. How am I supposed to explain that their grandfather is trying to put their father in jail? The same way you'd explain that their father is a thief, I said quietly. With the truth. She started crying then. The deep, wrenching sobs I remembered from when she was a little girl and had scraped her knee or lost a favorite toy. But I wasn't her daddy fixing her problems anymore. I was a 70-year-old man who'd finally learned the difference between love and enablement. Daddy, please, she whispered. I'll pay you back every penny. We'll sell the house if we have to. Just don't let this go to court. Please. It's too late for that, sweetheart. This isn't about money anymore. And it wasn't, though it had taken me 3 days to realize it. This was about Martha's memory. About the trust she'd placed in me to be strong enough to survive her death without losing myself in the process. This was about the grandchildren who deserved to grow up understanding that actions have consequences. That family doesn't mean the right to abuse someone's love. This was about the man I'd been before grief made me stupid and desperate for connection. Thursday afternoon, Harold called with news that made my chest tighten with something between vindication and sorrow. The district attorney wants to meet with you, he said. They've uncovered enough evidence to file charges for fraud, forgery, identity theft, and elder abuse. Troy's looking at serious prison time if this goes to trial. How much time? 5 to 10 years, potentially more if they can prove intent to defraud. Harold paused. Walter, they found evidence of gambling debts exceeding $90,000. Your son-in-law has been using your money to feed an addiction that's completely out of control. $90,000. The number echoed in my head like a bell tolling. More than I'd made in some years driving truck. More than Martha and I had ever had in savings at one time. There's something else, Harold continued. Megan might be facing charges as well. Some of the forged documents have her signature on them. My daughter, my little girl who'd cried when she accidentally stepped on a spider, who'd brought home stray cats and broken-winged birds, who'd hugged me so tight at Martha's funeral that I'd thought my ribs might crack. My daughter who'd apparently learned that love was something you could cash in when you needed it most. I need to think about this, I told Harold. That night, I sat in Martha's chair again, holding the photo from our 40th wedding anniversary, the one where we're both grinning like teenagers despite the gray hair and the wrinkles. Martha had insisted on having it taken at the truck stop where we'd first met, back when I was 23 and she was 19 and the whole world seemed possible. What would you do? I asked her picture. What would you do if it was your father who'd betrayed us? But I knew what she'd do, because I'd watched her do it 20 years earlier when her own brother had stolen money from their parents' estate. Martha had hired a lawyer, pressed charges, and never spoken to him again. Love doesn't mean being a doormat, Walter, she'd said. Sometimes love means setting boundaries that hurt. Friday morning, I called Detective Martinez and told her I wanted to proceed with all charges. The arraignment was scheduled for the following Tuesday. Harold advised me not to attend, said it would be too emotionally difficult, but I disagreed. I wanted to look Troy in the eye when he pleaded not guilty to charges we both knew he was guilty of. I wanted him to see that the foolish old man he'd been stealing from had grown teeth. The courthouse was busier than I'd expected, full of people dealing with their own catastrophes, their own betrayals. I sat in the back row and watched Troy shuffle in wearing an orange jumpsuit and handcuffs, his expensive haircut looking out of place against the harsh fluorescent lighting. He saw me and our eyes met across the courtroom. For just a moment, his facade cracked, and I saw something that might have been shame or regret. Then his lawyer whispered something in his ear, and the moment passed. When the judge read the charges, Troy's voice was barely audible. Not guilty, Your Honor. But we both knew better. The family meeting happened 3 weeks later at my request. I'd invited Megan, her children, Martha's sister Dorothy, and my brother James. Everyone who mattered, everyone who'd been affected by Troy's actions whether they knew it or not. They gathered in my living room on a Sunday afternoon, the children playing quietly in the corner, while the adults sat in awkward silence. Megan looked like she'd aged 5 years in a month, her face hollow and drawn. She hadn't spoken to me since Troy's arrest, communicating only through Harold when legal matters required it. I'd spent hours preparing what I wanted to say, writing it down and crossing it out and writing it again. But when the moment came, I forgot my prepared speech and spoke from the heart. I know some of you think I've been too harsh, I began. Some of you think family should forgive family, that love means giving second chances and third chances and as many chances as it takes. Dorothy nodded, her expression sympathetic. She'd been pushing for reconciliation since the day after Troy's arrest, insisting that Martha wouldn't have wanted the family torn apart. But Martha also wouldn't have wanted me to be a fool, I continued. She wouldn't have wanted her grandchildren to grow up thinking that stealing from people who love you is acceptable behavior. She wouldn't have wanted her memory dishonored by letting the truck she died in be sold to pay gambling debts. I stood up and walked to the coffee table, where I'd spread out copies of all the evidence Harold and I had gathered. Bank statements, forged documents, loan applications, insurance claims. A paper trail of betrayal that stretched back 4 years. This isn't about money, I said, looking directly at Megan. This is about respect. This is about understanding that love has boundaries, that trust, once broken, has to be earned back through actions, not words. Megan's voice was barely a whisper when she finally spoke. What do you want from us, Daddy? I want you to understand that choices have consequences, I said. I want you to teach your children that family means more than just sharing DNA. Family means honor, integrity, keeping your word even when it's inconvenient. And Troy? She asked. Troy made his choices. Now he gets to live with them. The civil trial lasted 3 days. Harold presented our case methodically, walking the jury through every forged signature, every unauthorized transaction, every lie Troy had told to cover up his gambling addiction. The defense attorney, a young man who looked fresh out of law school, did his best to portray Troy as a victim of circumstances, a good man who'd made bad choices under pressure. But the evidence was overwhelming, the pattern too clear to deny. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours before finding Troy liable for fraud and intentional infliction of emotional distress. The judgment was for $97,000, plus punitive damages, plus attorney fees. Troy didn't have $97,000, of course. The house would have to be sold, the cars repossessed, the savings accounts drained. Megan and the children would have to start over with nothing, but at least they'd be starting over without him. I felt no satisfaction in their ruin, only a deep sadness for what might have been if Troy had been the man I'd thought he was. 6 months later, I was washing Martha's truck in my driveway when a car pulled up that I didn't recognize. Megan got out, moving slowly like someone who'd been carrying a heavy load for too long. She looked different, thinner and more serious, but there was something in her eyes I hadn't seen in years, something that looked like peace. "Hi, Daddy," she said. "Hi, sweetheart." We stood there for a moment, separated by 6 feet of concrete and 6 months of silence. The truck gleamed between us, Martha's rosary catching the afternoon sunlight. "I left him," she said finally. "I know. Harold told me. The kids are staying with Dorothy while I look for an apartment. I got a job at the elementary school, teaching 3rd grade. It doesn't pay much, but it's honest work. Your mother would be proud." Megan's eyes filled with tears. "I'm sorry, Daddy. I'm sorry I chose him over you. I'm sorry I let him convince me that your grief was the problem instead of his lies. I'm sorry it took losing everything for me to remember who raised me to be better than that." I set down the sponge and walked over to her, this daughter who'd broken my heart and was now trying to put it back together one apology at a time. "You're not your husband," I said. "You're Martha's daughter. That means something." We held each other there in the driveway, surrounded by the smell of car soap and the sound of children playing in distant yards. Felt like the beginning of something new. The first Christmas after Troy's conviction was awkward and quiet, but it was honest in a way our family gatherings hadn't been for years. Megan and the children came to my house on Christmas Eve, just the 4 of us around Martha's dining room table, eating a ham I'd cooked myself and sharing stories about holidays from when the kids were younger. Sarah, who was 14 now and looked more like Martha every day, asked me about the truck during dessert. "Grandpa," she said, spooning peach cobbler into her mouth, "Mom says the truck was really important to you and Grandma." Can you tell us why? I looked across the table at Megan, who nodded encouragingly. We'd agreed that the children deserved to know the truth, age-appropriately presented, about what their father had done and why their family had fallen apart. Your grandmother and I bought that truck together, I said. It was the last big purchase we made before she got sick. She used to say it represented all the trips we were going to take together, all the adventures we were planning for our retirement. What kind of adventures? Asked Tommy, who was 12 and had inherited his grandfather's curiosity about engines and machinery. We were going to drive to Alaska, I said. Your grandmother had always wanted to see the northern lights. We were going to take our time, stop at every little town along the way, eat at truck stops and sleep in the cab if we felt like it. Did you ever go? Sarah asked. No, honey, we never got the chance. But I still think about that trip sometimes. I think about what she would have said about the mountains in Canada, or how she would have reacted to seeing a moose for the first time. The children listened with the kind of serious attention kids reserve for stories about their grandparents, filing away details they'd remember long after I was gone. After dinner, Megan helped me wash dishes while the kids played video games in the living room. We worked in comfortable silence for a while, the rhythm of washing and drying familiar from thousands of similar evenings when she was growing up. They ask about him sometimes, she said finally, not looking at me. I know. What do you tell them? That their father made some very bad choices, and that sometimes people we love disappoint us in ways that can't be fixed. She paused, scrubbing at a stubborn spot on a plate. I tell them that families can survive almost anything if they're built on truth instead of lies. That's a hard lesson for kids to learn. It's a hard lesson for anyone to learn, Megan said. I'm 38 years old, and I'm just figuring out the difference between loving someone and enabling them. We finished the dishes in silence, and then Megan surprised me by walking to the garage door. Can I see it? She asked. I knew what she meant without asking. We walked out to the garage together, and I turned on the overhead light that illuminated Martha's truck in all its carefully maintained glory. I'd spent hours detailing it for Christmas, polishing every surface until it gleamed like it had on the showroom floor. Megan ran her hand along the hood, tears streaming down her cheeks. I should have protected it, she said. I should have protected her memory better. You were protecting your marriage, I said. There's no shame in that. But I chose him over you. I chose him over her memory. How do you forgive something like that? I thought about that question, about the anger I'd carried for so long, about Martha's voice in my head telling me that love without boundaries wasn't really love at all. Forgiveness isn't about forgetting what happened, I said. It's about choosing to build something better on the foundation of what's left. 6 months later, Megan surprised me by enrolling in the community college's business program. She wanted to understand finances better, she said, wanted to be able to protect herself and her children from ever being vulnerable to someone like Troy again. I helped her with her homework sometimes, the two of us sitting at Martha's dining room table with textbooks spread between us, working through accounting problems and marketing concepts like she was 14 again and struggling with algebra. The children adapted to their new reality with the resilience kids seemed to possess in unlimited quantities. Sarah took a part-time job at the local movie theater to help with household expenses, and Tommy started mowing lawns in the neighborhood for spending money. They were learning lessons about responsibility and self-reliance that I wished they hadn't needed to learn so young, but they were learning them with grace and determination that would have made their grandmother proud. I started driving Martha's truck more often, not just on Sundays to the cemetery but on errands around town, to the hardware store, to the bank, to the places where Martha and I had built our life together. People would see me in the truck and wave, remembering her, and I realized that keeping her memory alive wasn't about preserving everything exactly as she'd left it. It was about continuing to live in a way that honored what she'd taught me about love and strength and standing up for what's right. The last time I saw Troy was at the grocery store 8 months after his release from prison. He was working as a bag boy, wearing a uniform that hung loose on his diminished frame, moving with the careful precision of someone who'd learned that every mistake had consequences. He saw me before I saw him, and for a moment our eyes met across the checkout lane. I expected to feel anger or satisfaction, or some complicated mixture of both. Instead, I felt something closer to pity. He looked older, smaller, like a man who'd finally run out of people to blame for his choices. He nodded slightly, a gesture that might have been acknowledgement or apology, and then looked away. I finished my shopping and left without speaking to him. There was nothing left to say. That night, I called Megan and told her about the encounter. "How did it make you feel?" she asked. "Empty," I said, "like looking at the shell of something that used to be a person." "Do you think he's changed?" "I think prison changed him, but I don't know if he's learned anything from it. That's his journey to make now, not ours to worry about." The truth was, I'd stopped thinking about Troy months earlier. My energy was focused on the future now, on helping Megan rebuild her life, on being the kind of grandfather Martha would have wanted me to be, on living each day with purpose instead of just surviving it. I donated $10,000 to the local truck driving school that spring, money I'd recovered from the civil lawsuit, establishing a scholarship fund for students who couldn't afford tuition. The first recipient was a 19-year-old kid named Marcus whose father had died in a work accident, leaving the family with nothing but medical bills and determination. Watching Marcus learn to handle an 18-wheeler reminded me of my own early days on the road. The pride of mastering something difficult, the satisfaction of earning an honest living with your own skills and effort. We talk sometimes during his training breaks about the loneliness of long-haul driving, about the responsibility of hauling freight that people depended on, about the dignity that comes from work that serves a purpose larger than yourself. Martha would have liked Marcus, I thought. She always had a soft spot for young people who were willing to work hard for their dreams. The truck driving school named the scholarship fund after Martha, and they put a small plaque in the lobby with her picture and a quote I'd chosen from something she used to say. "The road ahead is only as long as you make it, but it's always worth traveling if you're heading towards something better." Every time I visited the school to check on Marcus's progress or meet with other scholarship recipients, I'd stop and look at that plaque, at Martha's smiling face frozen in time, and I'd feel something I hadn't felt since the day she died. Peace. Not the peace of forgetting, but the peace of remembering well. The peace of knowing that love, real love, doesn't die when the person you love dies. It just changes form, becomes something you carry forward instead of something you hold on to. Martha's truck sits in my driveway now, washed every Saturday, driven whenever I need to remember that some things in life are worth fighting for. The rosary still hangs from the rearview mirror, and sometimes, when the light hits it just right, I can almost feel her presence in the passenger seat, reminding me that the road ahead is only as long as you make it, but it's always worth traveling if you're heading towards something better. If you liked this story, please like this video. Subscribe to the channel and share your impressions in the comments below.